In today's video, I'm going to do an overview of the Intel Xeon E5-2620V4. I've paired the system with 16GB of RAM, an SSD, and an RX 580. Now on price, this was only £2 and I think that is worth it, so we're just going to go right into testing. The first game I'm testing is CS2, so let's just hop right into a match. But before we do that, let's take an overview of our settings. Let's put all of this on low. But make sure that we're at the right resolution of 1080p, but at full screen. Now we can just go right into a match. Now we're in, so let's just play the game and see how it runs. It's a bit choppy as we're joining in, but should fix itself. I believe this latency is just my ping, and now that we're in the game, we're seeing CPU temperatures around 30 degrees, 31 degrees. So I think that is pretty good, and the FPS on the lowest possible settings at the highest resolution of 1080p is around 120, but it has horrible dips all the way down to 30, which is quite bad. And the CPU seems to be quite equal distribution between all the cores, which is good. So it's doing quite well, so let's just increase the graphics quality a little bit. And with the increased graphics, we still seem to be getting the same amount of FPS at around 120. As we can see, Counter-Strike runs great, so let's just move on to the next game. As you can see, the next game we are testing is GTA 5, so let's just get a quick glimpse at the settings before running benchmark mode. Turn VSync off. And have a look at these settings before I go to benchmark mode. They're basically all at very high. And let's start the benchmark. As you can see, we are now in the benchmark, and at very high settings, we're getting a pretty respectable 83 FPS, dipping down to 75 FPS. Meanwhile, that CPU temperature is same as CS2, around 31 degrees, and the distribution of CPU cores utilization is pretty decent, all hovering about 40%, 20%, one of them at 70%. And we can see it running pretty good here. So yeah, kind of dabbles into the hundreds in FPS, triple digits, and I think that's been a pretty good test for GTA 5 to show how it would run 75 to 100 FPS. Let's move on to the next game. As you can see, the next game we are testing is Splitgate. Now let's head up right to the settings, mainly because in my last video, one of you guys commented that the game was capped at 120 FPS. So in this video, I'm going to fix that and uncap it, or to 360. And everything's just going to be on epic and high, because that's what it did for me. That's the calibrated settings. I'm just going to apply and exit, and then hop into a match. We are now in the waiting area, and it seems that the game is running great. Better than I thought, at around 300, 200 FPS. It's pretty decent. This game also did well on the 10-core CPU, because the core distribution on this game is really good, and we see no difference here. Same with the CPU temperature, maybe going up to 32 degrees. Getting a little bit hotter. System's getting a little bit louder, but it's worth it for this amount of FPS, like 200, 250. It's more than enough, unless you have like a 360 Hz monitor. So yeah, definitely playable. So let's move on to the next game. As you can see, the next game we are testing is Minecraft. So just take a look at the settings here. VSync off, obviously, max FPS, 16 chunks. On fancy graphics. So let's just create a world. As you can see, we're in Minecraft. I set 16 chunks, and even though the game's chunks haven't really loaded in yet, you can already tell it's going to run good, because look at that. We're getting into the late 300s in FPS, late 3 digits. If we look at the floor, look, floor looking, we get 400 FPS. And we look up, dips down 160. Oh, village. The CPU cores are kind of maxing out, and the CPU temperature is the highest we've seen, around 33 degrees. And the game is a bit choppy, but the FPS is high, which is good. So yeah, if we destroy a lot of things really fast and move the mouse, it chops up a bit, but chunks haven't been fully loaded. Oh, they have. If we turn the render distance down to 12, so we could see a little bit of an increase in performance. Yeah, it's much better. Less choppiness. I could do this now without it chopping. And now I'm going to do a TNT test. But this time it's different because it's inside one of the villagers' houses. So start up the TNT time lapse. Now it's time for the TNT test. Let's blow up the entire village. As you can see, the CPU handled that really well, and not a single block from the village remains. That was awesome. Anyways, let's move on to the next game. As you can see, this current test is something we usually wouldn't do, but we saw other people doing it and decided to do it because they're good for CPU tests, and it's called pass mark. So let's just get straight into the CPU mark test and run it. As you can see, our test is now done, and this CPU did quite shitty. Well, it did alright. It was in what CPU Mark says, mid 50% of all scores. So I'm assuming that's a little worse than average. It says here, world average 18,000. Your CPU Mark score 9,000. So I don't think that's good. Maybe that line there is average. So let's just move on to the next test. As you can see, our next test is heavy load. There's just some random trash I found on the internet. Let's use it as a CPU test. With the funny dancing cube, we're getting around 5-6 FPS with 100% CPU usage across the board. CPU temperatures hitting around 34 degrees. It's pretty high. Well, not high, but the highest we've seen here in this video. So don't get this CPU if you want to look at cubes, I guess is the moral of the story. Let's move on to the next test. As you can see, our next test is an 8K video. So we're going to start out at 1080p and go up. As you can see, this 1080p video is no struggle for the system at all. But that's just today's standards. So let's go up to 1440p and see if it can handle that. There we go. GPU is at 13%, CPU is at 10%, pretty much unhinged. Now let's go up to 4K, which is still great. Looks amazing as well. Slightly bit bigger CPU usage there, around 15%, and video looks quite clear, so let's just go up to 8K. Now here we see quite a big spike in the CPU usage that is slightly going down. Oh, and you can see the video's lagging, so I'd say it's viewable but not preferable. I'd just stick to 4K if you were like using the CPU as a TV box or something. So 70 to 80, 90% CPU usage and 40% GPU usage. So I'd say, yeah, stick to 4K, and YouTube is doing pretty good. Let's move on to the next test. As you can see, we are doing the next test, which we do in every video, which is WebGL Aquarium. So as we're starting out at 500 fishes, we're at 60 FPS, 4% CPU usage. System doesn't really care. 1,000 fishes, still the same. 5,000, the same. 10,000, the same. Maybe a spike in CPU usage around 13%. 15,000, FPS goes down a little bit. CPU usage goes up a bit. 20,000, FPS goes in the 40s. CPU usage stays about the same. 25,000, around 35 FPS, same CPU usage, and 30,000, around 27 to 30 FPS, and the same CPU usage. For the Cinebench multi-thread score, we got 5,876. This is slightly worse than the 7-buck CPU, which got a score of 6,938 for single thread. We got a score of 732, which is actually better than the $7 CPU, which got a score of 622. But overall, for $2, it's hard to complain. So that's that. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.